Well, good morning, Rosewood. It is good to be with you this morning on another snowy day. I know Tanis thanked God for the snow. That may have been hard for some of the rest of us this morning. Depends how you viewed it or where you traveled from today. But you know what? I'm sure the farmers are happy when we get snow, correct? Right? Yes, we can be good with that. Okay, good. My name is Joel. I'm one of the pastors here at Rosewood, and I have the privilege today of walking through the next sermon in our series, A Journey to Easter. So 2 weeks ago, Pastor Joanna talked about Palm Sunday and talked about the journey to Jerusalem that Jesus took. Last week, we had our special guest, Dr. T.V. Thomas, that shared with us the journey to the garden and shared about what Jesus went through in that journey to the Garden of Gethsemane. And today, we are talking about Jesus' journey up to the cross, the moment when he gave up his life for us on our behalf. Now, before we pick up on that story, though, I want us to understand this whole idea of a journey, right? When we go on a journey, we often bring things with us. We make plans. We have a purpose and a direction that we're going. Maybe we'll use a map. We'll bring a compass. It depends on the journey we're going on. Now, if we were just going out for the afternoon on a journey, maybe what we would do to bring the things with us that we need, maybe we'd have one of those cool little fanny packs or shoulder bags that people wear. If we were going out for a whole day, we might have a bigger bag, maybe a handbag or a small backpack. But if we were going out on a week-long journey, maybe doing some hiking, some camping, something like that, we would probably need something a little bit bigger, right? A large hiking backpack where we can put all of the stuff we need for multiple days, food, water, sleeping bag, all that different stuff inside one backpack that we can carry. Now, this backpack was actually one that I bought back in 2010 when Carolyn and I decided to go on a backpacking trip to Europe. So what we did was we were young and we were naive, and we figured that the best way to travel Europe was to pack everything we could think of in a bag like this, carry it around from place to place as we were hopping on trains and planes and automobiles, and just carry this big honking thing with us wherever we went. We stayed in hostels. We went to little small restaurants as we were going about. And all through the airports, through the train stations, through different countries in Europe, we carried these beasts with us on our back. Now, we have since matured. And we have realized when we travel that rolling luggage was invented for a reason. We also now stay in Airbnbs instead of hostels because, wow, hostels are an experience if you've ever been to one. But in all honesty, these backpacks do have a place. Ours is currently in our storage room. We have not used this backpack since 2010. It has been in there ever since. But they are helpful. They are handy for a certain type of journey you might be going on. They back then, they actually fit in the carry-on because we didn't have all these crazy carry-on rules. So we wouldn't have to go to our baggage claim. We could just carry these onto the plane with us and get them. I think that was true. Actually, maybe I'm wrong about that. I saw Carolyn kind of go like this, and all of a sudden I think I'm remembering wrong. But you know what? This thing was heavy because it was packed full of things that we needed and probably a bunch of stuff that we didn't need for that trip. And I still remember those days where it weighed down my back. And I remember just how sweaty my back got carrying this around, especially in some of the hotter places, and embarrassed to take off the backpack because the shirt would be soaked. And, I'm traveling to these nice places in Europe and thinking, oh man, what are people going to think of me? But they were meant to carry a lot of weight. They were meant to carry a lot of stuff. And this backpack is going to help me today with this message that we're talking about. And it's a good analogy. It's actually an analogy I grabbed from our Grief Share class. So if anyone is in our Grief Share class at 242, you might be familiar with this. The reality is, for all of us, we walk through life with some sort of backpack, with something where we carry the weight of the things that we have done wrong. We carry the weight of all these mistakes. We carry the weight of our sin. But sometimes we also carry the weight of the things that have been done to us and the effect that sin has on us from other people. And as we look at the journey to the cross, from the Garden of Gethsemane to the point where Jesus died, we're going to talk about the effects of that sin on us as human beings. But what we are going to see is the effects of the world's sin on Jesus in that moment too, and how this affected his human nature, how he experiences emotion, how he experiences the feeling and the pain of taking on the weight of human sin. So first off, the first set of real feelings, emotions, and that Jesus experienced started in the garden with betrayal and abandonment. If you turn your Bibles with me to Mark 14:44, it should be up on the screen behind me as well. Here's what it says. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi, and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Am I leading a rebellion, said Jesus, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. Then everyone deserted him and fled. So in this moment in the garden, Jesus is betrayed by one of his disciples, by Judas, and then he's abandoned by the rest of them. The moment of betrayal Jesus experiences it's an intimate moment. Customarily, disciples would greet their rabbi with a kiss. And this signal was meant to allow Judas to clearly show the soldiers which one Jesus was, as it would have been very dark in the Garden of Gethsemane that night. But also, considering this was a customary greeting for disciples to give, it would not have alerted the other disciples that something was going on with Judas, other than, of course, the fact that he came with a cohort of soldiers. But what a terrible, terrible way to be betrayed, right? To be betrayed with a sign of friendship. To be betrayed with a sign of respect. This most intimate act being twisted and manipulated into a symbol of betrayal. But that's not the only feeling Jesus experienced before leaving that garden. Next, after a little scuffle and an ear flying off somewhere and a rebuke from Jesus, Jesus' disciples scatter and abandon him. Now, even though Jesus was aware that this was going to happen, that this had to happen in order for Scripture to be fulfilled, can you imagine the weight of that moment on him? Of being utterly alone, surrounded by enemies, as he gets led away from the garden. Now, before we move on to the next experiences that Jesus had, a big part of this message is for us to relate to what Jesus was going through, to how he would have felt. So let me ask you this question. When have you felt the weight and the hurt of being betrayed? When have you felt the weight and the hurt yourself of being abandoned? When we feel that weight, when we feel the effects of what others have done to us, of betrayal and abandonment, do you know what we do? We start adding weight to the backpack. But here's the other thing. We need to turn that question around, okay? When have we been the cause of betrayal and abandonment? When have we been the ones who have betrayed someone or abandoned someone? When have we made the mistake and sinned? It adds weight to our backpack. But you know what? This backpack's not too heavy yet. We can carry that. I think we can hold that up for a little while. We can continue on the journey. But there's some more. The second set of real human feelings and emotions that Jesus experienced while he was on trial. He was rejected, he was slandered, and he was mocked. So as Jesus was taken from the garden, he actually went on to 3 different trials that took place. The first trial was before the Jews with the Sanhedrin. The second trial was with Pilate. And he actually was sent back to Pilate after his third trial with Herod. And the Sanhedrin, his first trial, was essentially the Jewish court in which the high priest presided over judgment. And their power was limited because of the Roman occupation at the time, but they were capable of issuing certain judgments, carrying out certain sentences on people, except for the death sentence. And so when Jesus is brought before the Sanhedrin, multiple terrible things happen. But one of the key things that happen is another level of rejection that takes place. It's here we find the famous passage about Peter, Jesus' disciple, denying that he even knew Jesus 3 times. Peter is the one who, among all the disciples, we read about Peter throughout the Gospels. Out of all the disciples, we think he is the one that is going to stick with Jesus right to the end. Even just a few short hours before, he said, "I will not leave you, Jesus, no matter what happens." And here he is, abandoning his rabbi, denying that he knows him. Judas's betrayal was one thing, but this is a whole other sense of personal rejection and denial. But then it continues with slander and mockery and an even greater form of rejection that takes place within the Sanhedrin. So here's what it says in Matthew 26, verse 57 to 68. It says, "Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, 'This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.' Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, 'Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?' But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, 'I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God.' 'You have said so,' Jesus replied. 'But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven.' Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, 'He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?' 'He is worthy of death,' they answered. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, 'Prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you?' See, the slander and the mockery here are obvious. They're clear. People lying about who Jesus is, lying about what he has done, making up stories and false testimony, and then mocking him. 'Prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you?' Jesus is treated terribly. But there's also a form of rejection that happens here that we may not notice at first. It is here in this trial before the Sanhedrin where Jesus experiences a corporate rejection from his own people. Here, his fellow Jews, his fellow Israelites, God's chosen people, reject him, slander him, mock him. And yes, Judas's betrayal was bad because it was a betrayal by a friend. Peter's denial was bad because it was a rejection by someone who stood by Jesus no matter what, through thick and thin. But here, Jesus is rejected outright by his people. Again, we have to imagine what this would have felt like to try to understand it. More weight added onto Jesus' shoulders in this moment. And this comes to a head even more so and more clearly a little bit later when Pilate asks the Jews if he should crucify their king. And the Jews make an astounding statement, a scary statement, saying they have no king but Caesar. they're willing to reject Jesus so much that they acknowledge a pagan king instead. And that's part of the Roman trial that's to come. And these Roman trials were filled with their own experiences. Well, with Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, we have an individual who seems to really care very little about what's going on, but he just wants to please the people. You know, he wants them to approve of him. And so in the book of Luke, we find in chapter 23 that Pilate kind of just questions Jesus a little bit, asks him some interesting things, but then he learns he's a Galilean. And so he actually ships Jesus off to what's considered the third trial, to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. And here Herod treats Jesus as a form of entertainment, hoping to have Jesus perform some sort of miracle. I mean, Jesus' exploits had been heard all across the region by this point. And so Herod wants to see something. Herod wants to see Jesus do something to entertain him. And it gives this sense that both Pilate and Herod really don't care. They don't care about this trial. They don't care about this person that's been brought to them by the Jews. And that's kind of to be expected from the occupying force that is the Roman Empire. Luke 23:11, we find out that Herod had his soldiers dress Jesus in a robe, and they mock him. And then send him back to Pilate, where Jesus is mocked further. So once again, Jesus takes the weight of what's going on this moment on his shoulders. But then it comes back to us again. And we need to consider how this relates. How have we experienced rejection? How have we experienced slander or someone making up stories about us, lying about us? How have we been mocked? I think all of us have experienced that at some point in our lives. It's pretty much par for the course in this world. We will face rejection. Maybe it's in a relationship or a friendship. Maybe it's a job where you thought you were going to get this job and they said no, or fired from a job. Maybe there have been times when you have been lied about. Maybe there's times when people didn't truly want to understand you. Maybe you've been gossiped about, where you've been slandered and deeply hurt by others. Maybe you were bullied, mocked, made fun of. That stuff happens for adults as much as it happens for kids. And what it does is it adds more weight to the backpack. But again, we got to ask the opposite question. When have we been the ones that have rejected others? When have we been the ones that have slandered others? When have we been the ones that have made up stories about other people? When have we been the ones that have made fun of other people and hurt others for our own benefit? When have we had a laugh at someone else's expense? I think we've all been there. And it adds more weight to the backpack. It's getting pretty heavy. I think we could still carry it, but there's more to come. The third set of real human experiences that Jesus and emotions that Jesus had were on the way from Pilate to the cross. There was trauma. He was insulted. And he was utterly embarrassed. If we go back to the book of Mark, it says this starting in chapter 15, verse 15. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe, put on his clothes on him, and led him out to crucify him. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country. And they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him, dividing up his clothes. They cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. This is a story many of us have heard. Often, Good Friday, we walk through this crucifixion story. And we hear of the physical trauma that Jesus goes through. He is flogged, which means he is whipped to the point of having little flesh left on his back and shoulders. And as part of this traumatization and humiliation, they place a crown of thorns on his head and push it into his head and his scalp. They hit him with a stick, they spit on him, they beat him. And then on top of that, nails are driven through his hands and his feet as he's fastened to a rough wooden cross. The shock to the body, the physical shock and the blood loss in this moment would have been indescribable. This type of pain was scarring, not just physically. This is scarring mentally, scarring emotionally, pure traumatization. But the mental and emotional scarring continued when Jesus is left naked as the soldiers divide up his clothes. He's put on public spectacle, bloodied, without anything to cover himself, to be laughed at and insulted, mocked by the Romans, mocked by the Jews, and even mocked by other criminals crucified next to him. Can you imagine a more terrible moment? And we're going to stop here for just a moment to talk some more about the backpack. And I recognize that this is a painful part of the journey, but how many of us are carrying around the weight of trauma? How many of us are carrying around the deep-seated pain of what someone else has done to us? And I'm sorry if you're carrying that weight. How many of us are carrying the weight of embarrassment, of moments where we look back and we remember people making us feel small and insignificant? Perhaps we've been terribly insulted by people. We may be carrying the weight of all of that too. And again, we have to ask ourselves the other question. Is there a chance we have been the traumatizers? Is there a chance that we have been the people that have caused deep-seated pain for others? That we have embarrassed people or insulted them? If that is the case, which I have no doubt that we have all participated in some way at some point, it adds more weight to the backpack. And this backpack now has gotten incredibly heavy. But there's one more thing that Jesus experienced before he died on that cross. And it was a burden that superseded all of the other burdens that he experienced that day. If we continue reading Mark 15, 33 to 39, it says, "At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, 'Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani,' which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling to Elijah." Someone ran and filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." This was the moment. We talked about rejection from friends, from a nation. But now we have Jesus forsaken by his Father. You may wonder how this can work. I mean, Jesus is God. But here in this moment, we are specifically talking about Jesus' human nature. He was, in this moment, he's taken on the full, entire weight of sin on behalf of all humanity. And it is his sinless nature that allowed him to be this spotless lamb that could be there in place of the rest of humanity. And here, the full weight of sin, of our sin, the full weight of rejection crushes him. Utterly forsaken, utterly abandoned, completely alone. And it is here at this moment of death that something important happens on the journey to the cross. See, this journey was all about a transaction. Last week, TV Thomas talked about this cup, a cup that Jesus referred to in the garden as he prayed to his Father. He prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." This cup, this vessel contained everything that was about to be poured out onto Jesus. Friends, do you know who this cup was meant for? This vessel was meant for us. This was a penalty for sin. This wrath, this torment, this pain, this separation from God were the punishments that every sinner was supposed to bear. This was the vessel that was ours to bear. This was the weighed down backpack that we were meant to carry, that we were meant to suffer under. And in that moment, a transaction takes place. We're given a new backpack as Jesus takes the weight of ours. And in this new backpack, there's not the weight of sin in it anymore. Jesus gives us something in place of it. This backpack is filled with his righteousness. This backpack we are given from Jesus is filled with his forgiveness, with his grace. It's filled with his love. It is the most beautiful gift that we could receive. And you know what often happens is we try to open up this backpack and we try to put more weight inside of it. We try to put the weight of our sin back in here and hold on to it and carry it more. But Jesus says, no, you don't need to carry that anymore. You are free from that. And because of what Jesus gives us in return, because of his righteousness that he gives us, God no longer sees us as sinners, deserving of wrath, but as his righteous children, holy and pleasing to him. Isn't that beautiful? Which backpack would you rather carry? I think I'd rather carry this one. But friends, some of you are still so burdened. You are still under the weight of maybe your sin. You're still under the weight of the sin of others and how it's affected you. Today, surrender the backpack. Today, accept that on your journey to the cross, instead of receiving punishment and death, when we come to the cross, we see that someone's up there in our place. Jesus takes the weight. Jesus takes the backpack. Jesus takes the burden when we surrender it over to him. And he gives us this. He gives us his righteousness. So today, if you are ready to surrender that weight, to surrender that burden, I encourage you to pray along with me now. Jesus, there's no words to describe what you have done for us on the cross. There's no words to describe what you went through on that cross. But Jesus, today we recognize that we've been carrying around the weight of our sin for far too long. Today we recognize that we can't go on this journey under the burden of this weight. We can't deal with this weight on our own. But what you did for us on the cross deals with the burden of that sin, deals with the effects of that sin. And so this morning, Jesus, we come before you and we surrender this burden and this weight. There's a reason why it's called Good Friday. It is because of the good gift we have received by surrendering ourselves to you and receiving your righteousness. God, this morning we surrender ourselves to you and we receive your righteousness. Thank you, Heavenly Father, that you see us through the sacrifice that Jesus made for us on the cross. That you see us as holy and pleasing to you, as your children. This morning, God, we come before you and we worship you for all that you've done for us on this journey. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, worship team. Today, before you leave, just ask yourself if you have surrendered your backpack, your burden to Jesus on the cross. Perhaps today you can walk out of this place with a new backpack filled with Jesus' righteousness. If so, I encourage you to come to the front and pray with some of the people on our prayer team in the blue lanyards. These people know all of the freedom surrounding the burdens of Christ, and they know the joy of experiencing the power of the resurrection of Jesus, which we will talk about next week.
Also, for Good Friday, there is going to be a citywide service happening at Living Hope Alliance Church. There's 2 services, so one at 9 and one at 11, so you can pick the one that's good for you. It's a really good service, so I really hope that you can come out and enjoy. Have a great week.